All right, welcome to the FitBucks podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome there as well. We got a special one today. Obviously, it's no secret tuition just across the board in higher education is a big deal. And often it comes from undergrad, but even grad schools are starting to really explode, um, across the board. And it's always like, well, what's the solution? What are we doing? How do we fix this? And I love having ideas, and I love when people are really into looking at numbers. And that's why we have a special guest today, Dr. Richard Severin. I won't give up your thunder. I'll let you talk about yourself a little bit and introduce yourself. Now, I will preface this with this. This applies across the board to a lot of professions. Dr. Severin is really going to be focusing, like when we conversate today, we're going to be talking about the PT profession and DPT, because that's where we have deep background in, but it's really across the board. But Rich, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me on here. And for those, I guess, who don't know me, so I'm Rich Severin. I'm a faculty member at the University of Illinois Chicago, where I also serve as the title is Program Coordinator of Professional Education. It's better to, I think, probably for people to conceptualize just like the Assistant Program Director for our DPT program. And then I'm also the part-time faculty position at the University of Louisiana, Monroe. And I'm super excited to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and don't let him downplay it. Rich does like 1,000 different things. I don't know he has time and enough, like just of the day, to do everything that he's doing between social media and UIC and everything else. But it's great to have you. And this conversation stemmed from a social media post that you put up.
Yep.
It was just about enrollment numbers and whatnot at universities and the debt, all this type of stuff. Anyways, for those of you that obviously many of the people probably didn't see that post, will you just, give some background on and summarize what that post was about and some of the numbers involved, and then we can deeper dive into all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those looking for the original post, it's on my professional LinkedIn. It's a public post, so if you feel free to find it. I post on my platforms, PT reviewers, my social media, but I put more of my educational research and stuff like through LinkedIn because it's just kind of the platform where most educators are on. They're not on Instagram, really. I'm kind of a rare bird in that regard, and everyone's off Twitter now. So. Um, but it talked about, I'm still there, but I talked about looking at national trends from publicly available data provided by CAPTE. So for those who aren't aware, CAPTE, the Commission on Physical Therapy Education, it's the accrediting body for the profession, publishes an aggregate report of all programs, their data, their admissions data, trends, in terms of, applications, stuff like that. It's all there, as well as like the entering GPA and graduates and stuff like that. And I'm currently enrolled in this fellowship, professional fellowship in higher education leadership through APTA's Academy of Education. Highly recommend it. And a lot of our conversations in there are talking about some of the concerns, some of the pain points programs are facing with meeting admissions. It's a competitive market. I mean, if you look at the total number of programs, from 2018, so looking about, 6 or so years ago, to now, right? So this is factoring in accredited programs and developing programs. We were at 262, okay, in 2018, and we're over 317 now, okay? So numbers have increased, right? So it's becoming more and more competitive. And not only that, if you look at planned class size, so what CAPTE often just reports is, the planned class size, the applicants, qualified applicants, and they also include like the total number of enrolled students. We don't get program level data on like, okay, how many is individual programs reporting. So I did this it's a crude calculation. It's not, doesn't take into factor, the individual variability of what percentage are programs meeting their target for enrollment. And that's important because that is your main revenue source as in any academic programs, your tuition dollars. How many students are actually there, right? Paying tuition. And if you look at historically, that number, and I created this again, crude calculation of enrolled numbers, average is the national average, over planned class size. Now that's held strong from 2018 to 2021 nationally, about 100% in 2018 to the lowest got was 98. 2024, okay, that is now 92%. So pretty significant change. And if you look at, what factors that may contribute to that based on what's been previously reported, could be a number of different things. Could be maybe just there's a crude increase in the number of slots available. But if you look at application data, if you look at applications total, um, we went from per program an average of 499 in 2018 to 296 per program, right? And again, we have more programs, so the averages may, balance out to a degree, but qualified applications are down a bit. And then when you start looking specifically at public versus private, there are some pretty interesting trends. Public institutions have held pretty strong in terms of their fill rates. They're roughly around, they've been at 100%. They were down a little bit, last year about 5% and 100% to 95%. But if you look at private institution, where most of the growth has been in terms of, planned class size, going from 48 to 51, they have fallen, I won't say fallen off a cliff, but they went from a fill rate of 100% as well in 2018 to 88%,
Yeah.
right? So that can't just be due. And even if you look at the applicants enrolled, 45 in 2024, that's still lower, right? Than it was in 2018,
Yep.
right? So, and I think that, again, it could be a lot of different factors, and we don't have individual data, which CAPTI would provide the average, or at least gives a range of what's out there, because are some programs at 25% capacity? Are some programs over capacity to a degree, right? So we can at least see, okay, like, is this, what's contributing to these crude calculations? But it would come as no surprise that private institutions are struggling. There's more of them now, and they're generally a bit more expensive. So that's kind of the general gist of the conversation. And in terms of cost, total cost, a public DPT program, is not including living expenses, room and board, is about 74,000, whereas a total cost as average is for private is 124,000, right? So those are pretty significant differences, right?
Big
So
difference.
that's the lead into the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a big difference too. And that's why I stress, like, yes, there's a handful of programs that if you go to them, you might have a few more doors open to you just because of their network. But it's not like especially for like DPTs or OTs that we work with or SLPs, NPs, it's not like an MBA. Like if I go to Long Beach State and I get my MBA versus I go to Stanford or Harvard, I'm
Yeah.
going to make significantly more money if I go to Stanford or Harvard versus going to Long Beach State.
Yep.
Like you don't see that in
Not
the
really.
healthcare industries. I mean, you might be able to be like, hey, like I can go to work at this specific location or do this or have some networking effect, but the income side by and large is not that different. And you brought up the point like the schools are starting to feel it, and I see it on our side because when we at Fitbucks when we started doing stuff in 2017 with DPT programs for like workshops, like financial workshops and whatnot, a lot of it, almost like 95% of it was done by the students.
Yep.
Like the students would contact us and ask us to do it because when we would reach out to the universities, they would be like, we don't need this. Like our students don't have a problem. Well, that has completely shifted. Like we are now in 40 programs with actual curriculum and we work with all the chairs. We don't even work with students anymore. They don't contact us anymore. We're working, and so it's like completely switched because it's like, oh crap. Like
Yep.
we're losing applicants. And just to reiterate, I mean, I see it all the time because I talk to those chairs, and one of the numbers that I want to bring up because you brought up the fill rate, and you're correct. I hear it from all the time from them saying, "Hey, we're having a struggle. We can't fill like the last two seats, or we filled the last seat, but it was literally with the last applicant." And from what I've seen, the bigger issue for the programs is that they fill the seats, but it's a lower quality applicant. And now they're starting to churn out of the program. So now it's
Yeah.
blowing up their budgets. I mean, I know you touched on that too in a little bit of the post, but go ahead and touch on that, what you've
Yeah,
seen as well.
that's a great point. So a couple things, and maybe even some things I think could be solutions to this at a broader scale. So you're absolutely right. So if you look at total application rates have decreased, right? If you look at again, like just looking at raw averages from 499 to 296, and then for qualified applicants, these and that it kind of depends on how you define it, but it's really people who meet the criteria to be admitted potentially, into the program. That has went from 312 in 2018 to 156, right? So like that's dropped a lot. And then specifically looking at private institutions, right, versus public 2018 512 to now 358, but they're only trying to fill like 44 slots. Qualified 344 to 245, but again, only filling 44 slots. Private went from 49 total applicants to 251, okay, and then 288 qualified applicants to 172, and they're trying to fill 51, right?
Yeah.
So you're right, it just becomes a numbers game, but your pool of applicants becomes smaller, right? And then you mentioned too, like programs are held to Title IV standards that they have to admit people according to their graduate criteria, which is public knowledge, and you have to stay to that. Um, and so it gets harder and harder to fill seats, and then maybe you're going closer to that absolute average. Like a lot of programs have a lower average minimum criteria than they typically admit. Like I think our minimum criteria, we may be changing it. I think it's like 2.5, but it could be 2.7. But our average admission is like 3.5, 3.6.
Hmm.
So programs often have a wide range, meaning they're going probably much lower potentially into their applicant pool, getting closer to that minimum threshold. And then maybe is that student really gonna be successful? Or, I wouldn't say they're lower quality students, but they maybe need more support. And then are the programs prepared to provide that support? Which is concerning to me because if you aren't, you're really kind of taking advantage of that student because you're not putting them in a situation to be successful and just kind of taking their money, right?
Yeah.
So it's a multi-layered problem, and it kind of think comes down to some of the issues with debt. I mean, it's a tough environment out there for PT, especially in outpatient practice in some areas. Reimbursement continues to go down. And, the other thing that we face is while PT costs, for terms of the degree cost, obviously there was a big jump from master's to doctor by adding the extra year. If you look at the trends, they kind of have stayed somewhat stable in terms of DPT tuition, but you got to factor in what are they coming in with too? Because
Yeah.
undergraduate tuition, I mean, you have kids coming out with a bachelor's degree with six figures of debt with a
Yep.
bachelor's degree. So it makes that, the what was once maybe a manageable debt from professional training unmanageable, right? And if you're coming out with $250,000 worth of debt from a degree that's going to, transactionally provide a starting salary, maybe mid 70s, 80s starting, that's tough, right?
Yeah.
So and it comes as no surprise where we've seen public, interest in public programs. I mean, we had our largest, I think, like open house here, our state institution in years. And I think students are wising up. There's more access to information like you guys at Fitbox and other places that like, hey, that's an issue. And you got to be, it's not money isn't. I always tell students and people like money isn't everything, but it is a thing, right?
Yep.
You need it. You need to make fiscally sound decisions, and I think that is leading to some of those changes, and then again some of those concerns as well in terms of applications.
Yeah. And that's what I try to, share that with the chairs because we do have some data that we don't put out publicly. And, so that like chairs, I've had Cap D ask me this. I've had a number of players ask me this, say, what's my view on if the PT is, DPT is worth it or OTD is worth it or, whatever it is it worth it? And I'll focus on DPT. And what I tell them is, banking off the numbers that you said earlier, for example, like if you go to a public institution, $76,000 in cost between tuition and cost of living. Okay. Well, the way I look at it is if you look at the world in a vacuum of just going to PT school, well, if you go from undergrad to PT school, the expected income increase is about twenty to $30,000. Okay. So if you take a midpoint of that at $25,000, we typically look over 10 years. So that's $250,000 in extra income you just generated. Yeah, that's better than $76,000. That's a pretty good return on your money. That like go do that. Even the private institutions at the 121,000 is still doubling your money over time. Okay,
Yep.
you're still in a better financial situation. But you hit the nail on the head. We don't live in a vacuum, right? And these kids are coming out of school from undergrad
Yep.
that for, an average undergrad that makes $50,000 a year, 55 grand a year, they're getting well over six figures in debt.
Yep.
Like that doesn't compute,
Yep.
right? So you gotta, look at that world. And then the reality that goes to the second component is that the reality is that your DPT, like when we say, hey, 100% was getting accepted, that 100%, I mean, you had the 3.8 GPAs, the 3.9s, the 4.0s, the 3.6s, like the top of the top. Well, that means they also have other options,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And that's something we talk about as well. And we've talked about, in different things I do within different committees with APTA that like, if you look at, and I think that even goes into some of our diversity issues in terms of representation, because if, and I was a poor kid, mixed background household in Philadelphia, that, PT wasn't even on my register because I'm like, all right, well, like I got to find a way to like make some money and get at it, improve my situation. And I imagine there's probably a lot of students like that, maybe growing up, lower means. They're gonna look at this and say, hey, like I got good grades. Maybe I'm gonna try, something that either gets me to a higher ceilings of earning, like medicine, right?
Yep.
It's gonna have a higher debt, right? But earning potential is much higher. Or I'm going to go somewhere with lower cost, to a higher wage, a skilled up job, nursing, right?
Yep.
And those two professions, I mean, they have their own issues. Nothing's perfect, certainly now. Um, but I think if you look at representation within, nursing versus PT, it's a very different, and I think it has a lot to do with the ROI. Like people, especially when you don't come from means, like again, like I can speak to myself, you're a little bit more sensitive to these things, right? And unfortunately, I came out, of undergraduate with, very little debt, so I was able to, have my pick of what I wanted to do. But it's a real thing, and I think it has multi layers, and I personally think this has to be the number one focus of our profession, the financial viability, because if you look and in like in other workforce things too, because you look at other professions like pharmacy is facing kind of an existential crisis, right? In terms of, their viability. It's enrollment numbers nationally are struggling. And, that could be the canary in the coal mine that we need to look at how we're managing this and what can we do to lower the costs so more people, because people still need it, just like any profession. We still need pharmacists, we still need nurses, we still need physical therapists. Like we need to have a workforce to supply the work demand. And based on APTA data, like that came out recently, that I have had a part in, helping like the workforce projections over the next 10 years, like we're going to need PTs. Like there's still going
Yep.
to be a high demand, and we're only scratching the surface of who has access to our care. And hopefully that continues to improve. But we need to be able to supply workforce, and I wonder even if it's. I mean, there's some things I think we can do. We can talk about that and solutions nationally, to address this. And hopefully we'll sometimes talk about some creative solutions I've had, but um, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point too. Other professions like, have issues like so pharmacists, like a lot of the pharmacists that we deal with, number one thing is they graduate, they can't find a job.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
like there's just no jobs. They flooded the market years ago. And I said that about the PT industry probably about 9 years ago. Like you brought up how many more schools are being accredited. I'm like, you guys are running the risk, and this was before the debt issue. I'm like, you guys are running the risk of just flooding the market.
Well,
Like,
I think the DPT program, because if you look at where programs are propping up, and this thing was always, like there are, and it's the workforce data, which has inputs from Bureau of Labor Statistics, makes it pretty clear that there is still a demand even
oh
now, even
yeah,
if we had,
hmm
but it's regional. And
yes,
it's and I can Chicago, right? It's tough to find a job. Like there's certain but if you look at certain areas, like where most programs are popping up, they're in the sat. Like, why are we putting more programs,
hmm
in Miami, right?
yeah,
Why are we putting more programs, along, or in Chicagoland, right? Why are we putting more programs along the I-35 corridor in Southern California? And like people when they graduate, they're typically going to stay around on average where they practice. So, and then there are still areas of the country that are huge deserts for PT.
hmm
Only recently did we have a PT. Again, I've been a part of helping them, but Hawaii Pacific,
yep,
first program in the state of Hawaii ever, right?
yep,
I think there's one in Idaho. Maybe I'm wrong. There's none in Alaska. There's a
yep,
PTA program. So I think, even just like where are we putting programs is an issue too, because while we can say nationally it's not an issue, regionally it's becoming, and like and then why are we, you know I think there's still potential for growth of programs, but we need to have some guardrails to put those programs in areas of need, I think there's more popping up in the state of Pennsylvania, near and dear to my heart, and my PAAA shirt on here. Um, Pennsylvania is one of the most saturated markets in the country. Yet, and you look at the state of Maryland, there's only two programs in the state of Maryland,
yep,
right? It's just like there needs to be some, or at least conversations about where are we allowing new programs to start up, especially in areas that are very saturated for jobs. Because transactionally, while education should be transformative, the foundational transactional element is that I'm exchanging my money and time for a job, and that job is
yep,
PT. And we need to be doing stuff to prepare students to get jobs. And as of a profession, we're propping up programs in areas where it's going to be hard. It's in conflict with everything we're trying to do. So sorry, I can go on for this for
No, no,
5 minutes.
it's a very good point because
Yeah.
I experienced that with my wife. Those of you that have listened to the podcast that don't know, like my wife's at PT, and so when we were in San Jose, California, I mean, she was making a tremendous amount of money, but you only have, to your point, if I remember correctly, you have UCSF and
Mhm.
you have UOP, which is not really the Bay Area. It's over the mountain
Yep. Just
in
south of
Central Valley.
Yeah.
So you really don't have any PT programs besides UCSF.
Yep.
And she got paid bank. And then we came out to Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have like three or four programs all right around here, plus people moving here.
Yep.
The outpatient ortho pay is horrible. I
Yep.
mean, it's garbage.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, now you go about an hour outside of Austin, it's okay. It's better. You can make it, decent six figures. Like it's good. But within Austin, whew,
Tough.
it's
It's tough.
brutal.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little crazy, and that's a very good point that you brought up on that. Because I've never even thought about that about like where are they located because the majority of the students don't move,
Yeah.
and then they
That,
flood the
that
markets. So
and that's why I think the hybrid model is exciting, because it at least keeps students in those more remote areas. When I worked for a hybrid program at Baylor University, we had students from Alaska, which I thought was awesome. And like otherwise, that student had to move somewhere. I mean, there's probably been, you know, in the past, physical therapists from Alaska. They'd have to move to Washington or Oregon or somewhere else. And then the odds are that student going back once they've left their community, it
yeah,
gets kind of low, right? Versus we keep that student in that community, and now they're a resource. They're filling kind of those gaps in services. I had students from, I go back to I've had students from Idaho, and like they did their education through Baylor and graduated, and now practicing in Idaho,
yeah,
practicing in Hawaii. So I think hybrid can be a solution to this, but like we got to look at residential programs. Like why are we propping up more programs in areas that are just like it's hard to get jobs already?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually again transitions into solutions because obviously that is the problem there, right? Cost, the schools, the actual pay because of like saturated markets. Solutions, like you brought up one hybrid.
Yep.
Um, if you want to dive in deeper into that, go for it. If there's other ideas that you might have, because I mean, I love ideas because that's
Yeah.
where I started having fun with this stuff. So yeah, what are
Absolutely.
you thinking
Absolutely.
about?
So, in terms of solution, I do think hybrid's going to be part of it, because again, like you can potentially save some housing costs because especially a public institution, right? If you're doing that, and fortunately now there are some public um, hybrid institutions. Utah's got one, Colorado has one, Pittsburgh, which is a public, non-state but public institution. Lower costs, and then you can save expenses. For housing, that makes that a little bit more affordable. Obviously, there's transportation costs for labs and stuff, but I think that and the accelerated model, I think that the 2-year programs, getting time to faster, higher earnings, that's always a good thing. And eliminating a year of debt with interest, right? That's always a great thing, right?
Yep.
Don't need to tell you that. But the other is, and this came from a colleague of mine near and dear to my heart, Kendra Gagnon, who you should probably interview. She's got great perspective, um, of if we look at the growth in the profession, it's been primarily driven by private institutions, right? We went from, for public, right? We went from 120, right, to 140, right, over the years, with a big jump more recently. But if you look at private, we went from 139 to 174, right, in terms of total number of programs, right? So there's
Yeah.
been a bit of a jump. And private institutions, more expensive. They have bigger classes on average for, right, and that's like, it's an average. Um, you know, but, you know, where we could save costs is opening up more slots for public, because public, the slots available, is only around, it's been gone from 41 to 44. Could we, and I think a solution is just opening up more public seats. Now, obviously, there's carrying capacities for every program, but I think that's something we could do, our programs at least could consider, hey, like, I mean, is there potential, or is there stuff that CAPD could do or ACAP could do, to encourage public institutions to open more slots? Because the tough thing is there's always that, like, people are like, oh well, like, don't go to a private institution because, like, they're going to be way more expensive. That might be your only option, maybe, because the public ones are very competitive. Not saying private ones aren't, but I mean, I'll say from our purview here in Chicago, like, we're the best deal around. We have the highest pass rates first time in the state, and with the lowest cost. So
Yep.
our applications, what's the term students say? My DMs are flooded. We're
Mhm.
always getting applications, right? Um, so we can only take so many students. But is there a place for us taking more? And that way there's more opportunities for students to have lower costs. I think, like, and there's some states where it's very low, right? Like, I think Eastern Tennessee State, right? It's very affordable there. It's a
Yep.
public institution. So looking at ways that maybe it's a hybrid, I think what Colorado is doing and Utah are doing is exciting. It's having a residential and then a hybrid. So there's, you can scale up your capacity for enrollment to give more options for students for that public cost, and maybe tap into more rural areas of the state, because Colorado's, got the Denver, right, kind of metropolitan area, but like, you go outside of that, it's
Not
like,
much.
a little different, right? It's like, there will be blood, right? It's very rural, right? Um, and that again keeps those students in those communities too, right? So, uh, a kind of creative solution that I've thought about, is, and it was a post I made as well too, that I still stand, and I stand by it. I've had people criticize the notion, but one, I don't think the DPT was a bad idea. I think it was a good idea, and our success and advocacy in some states has supported that. what was a bad idea was removing the entry point to entry level as a bachelor's degree,
Yeah.
right? Because people are, "Oh, well, we should never have gone away from the master's." I think that was a mistake as well, too, making that the entry level degree. Because, um, at least, and this is what nursing has done. And nursing, I think, has been, no profession's perfect, but what they have done from their educational model, I think, is beautiful. Because
Yep.
you can enter at many different points. Um, you can enter in as you can do a 2-year associate's degree in nursing, right? Start making money, right? You have a transactional, like, I'm going to finish this job, this training, get a job, make money more than I would without this training. And then if they want to, they can go back, do their bachelor's in nursing, have more skills available to them, more scope. And then if they really want to, they could go and do a master's or doctoral degree of nursing. We could have the same thing. The entry point could have remained a bachelor's degree. Could have, if you wanted advanced practice, could have done the master's degree or specialty, or maybe even a doctoral degree if you wanted to maybe move into teaching. And that's literally what every single country around the world that has a formal training program for physical therapists does. It's a bachelor's degree. And then if you want advanced practice, it's a master's degree, right? Which is optional. And if you did a bachelor's degree in something other than PT and wanted to change careers, then it's a 2-year master's degree, right? So we got rid of the rungs that came before, and we shifted doctoral education to the entry level. And I think that was just um, people are like, well, we don't know what the landscape was. I think anyone with a working, you know, uh, brain, really, right? I don't know, like, or just any sort of foresight, because see, that's going to make things way more expensive and maybe challenging down the road. Because these things were happening even when, like when public funding, the omnibus ruling in '83 occurred under Reagan, right? To remove funding, like earmarked money from the Fed that went to the states to pay for undergraduate education, so that we knew this was going to happen, right? This
Yep.
decision was made in the late '90s, so we had time. The writing was on the wall. So to the point for solution, PTA is still a great option. It's 2 years, right? Often at a community college, lower costs, in community college, maybe not for PTA, but in some places, community college is even free, like in California, your home state. That maybe that we really and we really have not done a lot to connect PTA to DPT. So I think that's got to be part of the solution as well too, of more, how do we get PTAs to the DPT pipeline, um, so that if students wanted to enter at a lower cost where they could make some money, early, maybe pay off some debt and save for DPT, and that make that transition easier. Because right now you got to finish a PTA degree and then 2 more years of gen eds to apply for a DPT. These people already have 2 years of good clinical training, have licensure. We got to find a way to make that work a little bit smoother.
Yep.
Maybe do we adopt, and a couple programs? I think St. Catherine's out in Minnesota has created a bachelor's of PTA, for that purpose. The thing that I find it can be tough is, you know, outside of applying to DPT's program, that doesn't really give them additional scope or change their license. So maybe we look at that. Maybe that's a different thing we can do. That way, there's like you get something transactionally from finishing that bachelor's degree beyond just the right to apply to DPT school. That way, there's that can be that succession, right, at graduated cost to the highest degree of training, because people want to make a PTA degree, a bachelor's degree across the country, and I think that would be quite literally the worst decision we could make right now, because we would just be repeating the same mistake that we did with the DPT of like eliminating an affordable option, right? This as an entry level, and adding, you can add, don't subtract, like keep what you have
Yep.
and add on to it. Don't take that away, add on to it, make it optional. So But yeah, those are some things I've thought about. But I think an easy step is just encouraging public institutions to take more students, have
Yeah.
bigger class sizes.
Yeah, well, you hit on two areas that I like. I have my biases because of the way I learn and I do stuff, right? We all have those biases. So like my thing is I don't learn that well like reading textbooks and stuff. Like I want experience. And so my thing is how can we get them more experience? And to your point, like with nurses, that's what they do. They're getting experience. Well, it's the same thing. Why can't you do that with like a PTA or a bachelor's in PT and get that experience? And then you are working on some type of provisional license.
Yep.
Like, and that provisional license might be great for you. That's what you're going to do the rest of your life. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, well, then you go to the next level, the master's or the DPT or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And that's what you do. And in terms of the MPTE, for example, this is the second part that I'm really biased on because I really love experience. If there's a license that I have to get, that's a paper test, then it's like I want to do that as cheap as efficiently as possible. Because if you're just telling me I need to take a test to get this, then that's fine. What else can we do besides sitting at a university and being charged tuition? I'll give you an example. So in the world of finance, like I have the CFA charter, and worldwide it's known as like, the best of the best type of certification you can have and
Yeah.
designation. Okay. Um, University, it doesn't go through universities. All you have to have is a bachelor's degree. And then
Yep.
it's a series of three exams that are all self-study that are, 6 hours a piece. If you don't pass one, you have to take it a whole nother, you have to wait another year. So there's a grind to get through it, but it's very cheap. Like you could buy the materials and go through a bunch of tutoring classes and all this type of stuff. And it's like 10 grand,
Mhm.
right? Not 150,000. Now, given we're not help, I guess you could say we're helping on people's health because finance stuff, it's like we ruin their finances, like that can help. But and we're not working on bodies and stuff, so I know there's some other stuff there that you have to go through. But for me, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to say you have to pass this exam and that's the only thing, then why are we doing everything else? Because I hear from I won't obviously name any chairs or any programs, but oftentimes I hear from them and they're like, I want to create the best PT I could potentially create. But my number one goal is getting them to pass the MPTE because that's one of the metrics that we're measured on. And it's like, well,
Yep.
if that's the metric you're measured on, get them to pass the MPTE as fast as you can and then get them into the industry to start getting experience so they can build their skills.
Yep.
Like, so
Yeah.
anyways, that's where I'm biased at.
Yeah, it's part of a broader conversation about just where education is moving, competency based and certificate based, and I mean the argument for, and I still think you still need a formal training and that, and like because it's part and parcel. NPTE is part of it. It's really the last rubber stamp,
Correct.
right? But like you do have experiential learning in your clinicals, which you have to go through rigorously and assessed. So that's part of it. I mean, what some people have proposed, which is something we don't do here, and I'm kind of with you, but getting into a whole different conversation of having a practical component to your licensure exam. Because you're right, like a paper exam, you know, I mean, it assesses your knowledge and reasoning ability, but it doesn't assess your like psychomotor skills at a standard level. Like we do have like
Right.
standards people have to meet for clinical affiliations that they have to, complete to graduate and then to take the MPTE. But Canada, our neighbors to the north, and I think some countries around the world besides Canada as well have a practical component to your board exam that like that because it's a hands-on skill. But I mean, we don't really do that with other things, in healthcare. Unfortunately, we don't do that in, really anywhere in medicine. I don't think nursing does it either. But I do think that that does speak to that notion of having, some sort of experiential pathway, with that like graduated education of PTA to bachelor's to DPT. Like I really, going back, I think that's how that would look. I'm still not sure. Is that more PT programs creating undergraduate degrees? Because that's the other thing too. Like kinesiology can be kind of a tough sell to students. Because again, education, the social contract with institutions. There is a great book called Great Upheaval, and I recommend everyone in higher education to read that. It's part of our recommended reading for fellowship, and it talks about a lot of things, but it talks about historical notions of how education came about during the so what the model we follow now really was born out of the Industrial Revolution. Okay,
Yep.
that education, okay, educational institutions were designed to provide jobs that the economy needed, that students kind of wanted. So it was supposed to be, and obviously there's opportunities for, scholarship and research and independent thought. Like it's supposed to be a component of that. But transactionally, that's it. Like we're training you to do a job. And sometimes those jobs were like professions, law, medicine, teaching, clergy, right? And I think we've kind of, in undergrad education have moved away from that to where your bachelor's degree doesn't really, unless you're doing engineering, nursing, teaching, even finance, maybe, actuarial science, computer science, computer programming. Unless you're in those majors, there isn't a guaranteed, like, because you don't have a licensure or a thing that you're going to go right into. A lot of times it's a bridge to a graduate degree. And like that, I think that's it. So overall, there's a lot of things that need to be kind of retooled, because it's a, and then we don't even have time to get into this, but like the number of students enrolled in undergraduate is really struggling too. I mean, we knew about this with the enrollment cliff that was
Hmm.
coming from the 2008 financial crisis, which we saw a drop in childbirths, and those kids, that cohort's now here in undergrad. They're 18 years old, 17 years old now, applying to colleges. There's less of them. And then the male exit from undergraduate education, there's, a precipitous drop in male numbers. So there's just less students available that are going to be even thinking about, graduate education. So it's going to be, it's going to be interesting, but I think there are some things we can do to weather the storm. And again, like I think hybrid, is a component of it. I think public institutions finding a way to take more students. And then as a profession, we need to be creative of looking at ways how do we connect our best ROI at our lowest cost PTA, right, to the highest of entry level. How do we connect those better? Because if people can start a 2-year degree at associate's level and eventually become a PT, I think that's a great option for some students. Maybe some will do the traditional route, BS, DPT, or the 3-in-3 programs. But I think there's some things we need to look at creatively, with this pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah, and my main hope is that they're proactive about it, not reactive. I have my serious doubts that they're going to be proactive, just because, until there's a major problem, people tend not to act. And so, I mean, the universities on that side of the world are still making a ton of money, and they're still driving in a lot of money, especially on the private side. And yeah, they hurt it because it hurts their budgets and everything. But until they actually really get hit with it, which they're starting to, are they going to turn around and say, "Yeah, we got to change something here"? Like, and they're going to force it, and hopefully it's not too late, because if they don't do something, I could see, like a lot. So when you have in the healthcare industry, you got, some protections in there because you have to be licensed and all that type of stuff. But for a lot of the other industries, like some of the ones you brought up, you don't have to have licenses. So like we've seen it a lot with, you brought up engineers and coding. Like I have seen a whole proliferation of code schools and all that type of stuff just
Significant.
across the country. And when I talk to major employers, people that I know from like the Facebooks of the world and whatnot, they're like, if you don't go to like a top 5 engineering school, we don't hire you out of a university. We rather just hire a code school person that's entry level and get them trained up. Like, why would we? It's the same,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's the same education, and the ones at code school are probably a little bit older, so they're probably a little bit more mature and really want to do this versus just going through the motion. So, anyways, that's my hope, is be a little bit proactive and go from there. So, but yeah, as you mentioned your socials earlier, where can people find you? Facebook, websites, all that type of stuff. Where can people find you at?
Yeah, you guys can find me. Again, my social media is PT Reviewer, and on Instagram it's PT_reviewer. And then Rich Severin on LinkedIn. That's where I put again a lot of these conversations I put on there. So Joe, thanks for having me on here. And I would really recommend reaching out to Kendra. I mean, she's got a great insight on this and is a great conversationalist.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. And we appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. We'll see you guys on the next episode. See you later.